Until they bring the streetcars back. Chapter 33. Downtown, they hauled me into the city jail like I was going to make a break for it or something. I shuffled around the police station in a daze, hardly knowing what was going on. Papers and questions and waiting in the grubby rooms. It was like I'd thrown up on myself and I'd never be clean again. And people would screw up their faces and hold their noses like they did when I had bean soup all over my jacket. How old are you? 18. Sorry, kid, you're not a youngster anymore. You're in the big time now. They called my parents. Cripes, what would my dad think about me and my mom and Lola? I couldn't think straight, and I tried to decide what I'd tell them. And then I thought of Gretchen. If I told the truth, what would happen to her? If I told them about the stash, it would only get me into a lot more trouble. And even if it wouldn't, would I give up on stopping Letterman? I could almost laugh at how screwed up everything was. They snagged the wrong guy. In a small room, I sweat with my bawling mother. They took off my handcuffs and I couldn't think of anything to say, and she sat beside me on a wooden bench like she'd been run over. I don't know what I've done wrong, Kelvin. We did the best we could. What did we do? What did I do? She sobbed. I gave up the ghost. It wasn't you, Mom. You didn't do anything. How could you do such a thing? How could you do this to us? I did the best I could. Didn't we do the best we could? I tell you, I'm hoodooed. It'll be all right. Don't worry, Mom. Don't worry. Don't worry. You're in jail. You've been arrested. You'll have a criminal record for the rest of your life. And you say, don't worry? How's Dad? He doesn't know what you do to do. He refused to come to a jail to see you, and if Calvin's been stealing liquor, let him stay in there. That's where he belongs. We sat there like strangers, and my mother sobbed and kept blowing her nose into a soaked hanky. They say a public defender will help you if we don't have a lawyer, she said. I don't know what to do. Should we get a lawyer? Gosh, no, Mom. I don't need a lawyer. Cripes. I stole the stuff. What good would a lawyer do? Finally, a policeman came to the open doorway and told her she had to go. I stood awkwardly. Will you call Lola? I had a date with her tonight. My mother struggled to stand, and she'd turned 137 years old in the last 10 minutes, and it really bothered me to see her like that. What'll I tell her? That you're in jail? Criminy, I didn't know what she should tell her or if it would make any difference. Tell her I'm sick and I have the flu. They were holding me over the weekend until I could see a judge on Monday. My mother would ride the Grand Mississippi home alone. When the iron door to my cell slammed shut, it echoed like I was in a huge dungeon or something, and I could still hear it even though I'd been sitting there thinking for a long time. I tried not to panic, but I was really scared, and I thought I might go nuts any minute. I stood up and steadied myself against the cold iron wall. Spit on it, I told myself. Spit on it. The cell was only big enough to take about 2 steps, and you had to turn around. I had a metal toilet without a lid and 2 bunks that folded from the wall. Geez, when you had to go to the can, anyone walking by could stare at you, like an animal at Como Zoo, and I figured I'd wait until it was dark to go. There were guys in the other cells, but I couldn't see them. The cells faced a corridor that had high windows on the opposite side. I hoisted myself onto the upper bunk and tried to ignore the strange noises and sounds around me. When it got dark and they finally turned off most of the lights, I couldn't sleep. I could see Lola's face and her bunny teeth, and I remembered how she laughed. I escaped through the barred windows on the wings of my memories, across the sky north, and I thought about Uncle Emile and the time I rode the moose. We were cutting across a large lake in the old town canoe when my uncle spotted a bull moose swimming from an island to the far shore. We paddled like crazy until we caught up with it. It didn't know I didn't know they could swim, and it was kind of dog paddling along. Geez, it was huge, and his antlers looked like 2 big sails, and it was snorting at us. But it was pretty helpless because it had to keep swimming or it would sink. My uncle told me to ease over to the side of the canoe and get on its back. By the third summer I'd spent with him, I'd do anything he told me. I slipped into the water and swam up at the back of the moose and hung on to its hair of its neck. Uncle Emile stayed back a ways in the canoe, and he clapped. That a boy, that a boy. Ride him, cowboy. I started to think that maybe this wasn't such a good idea, and the bull kept looking over his shoulder at me with a big black eye, like he was saying, Wait until I get on shore, you little twerp. My uncle had taught me that a moose was more unpredictable and cankerous than a bear, that just for the heck of it, it might come over and stomp you. I yelled at my uncle. What do I do now? You climb on. Now you gotta ride it out. My uncle laughed, and I didn't dare get off because I was afraid the moose would turn around in the water and slice me up in front of with its front hooves. I hung on to a neck and rode it out, and even though it was in the cool lake, I was sweating like mad. When the moose was almost to shore, my uncle told me to slide off. Geez, easy for him to say, but I did. I started swimming to beat the band out into the lake towards the canoe. The moose hit bottom, walked out of the water, and looked back at us. He shook his black coat and snorted like he was saying, "Come on over here and try that." My uncle told me that there weren't many people in this whole world who had ever ridden on the back of a wild moose, and for the rest of the summer I felt pretty good about myself. But as I thought about it in my little bunk in the dark cell, I felt like I was riding the moose again, scared to death at what I was doing, and I could hear my uncle's words. You climbed on, now you gotta ride it out. I had climbed on, but I didn't know if I could ride it out, and I didn't know how to get off. I'd never been in a courtroom, and it felt like a funeral parlor, though I'd never been in a funeral parlor either. But with all the dark woodwork and dim lights and everyone quiet, it was like someone had died. I stood in front of the high bench like a murderer, and that sad-looking guy who was the public defender stood beside me, too fat for a suit. When I when I talked with him in my cell the day before, he told me to plead guilty at the arraignment because it was my first offense or something. At the arraignment, I was in and out of a much smaller room in about 3 seconds, and the guy told the judge we pled guilty. Geez, it sounded like he was on it with me. My mother and father huddled in the first row, and a bunch of gloomy-faced people were there. I didn't know who the heck they were, hanging around to watch the Gant family public humiliation. The scrawny, white-haired judge looked like he died 5 years ago, but he stared at me like he ate nails for breakfast. Do you love your parents? He said. Yes. Look at your parents. I turned, but my father in his Sunday suit wouldn't lift his head. My mother glanced at me for a second like I was an orphan, and then she turned her crying eyes to her lap. Do you see what you're doing to them? The judge said. I turned back to face him. Well, do you? Yes. I hated the judge for what he was doing to all of us. I don't know what's getting into you youngsters. You think you can go out and break the law whenever you please. You usually don't get caught the first time, so I assume you've been doing this right along. Your crime falls under Minnesota Statute 622.06, grand larceny, second degree. Do you know what the penalty is, son? No. Up to 5 years in the state prison. What do you think of that? It's funny, but right then I thought, darn, I didn't have to swipe 10. 2 would have been enough. But I couldn't tell the old bugger that. Behind him, I heard a sob from my mother's lap. I don't know, I said. It's not funny, now is it? I'm giving you 30 days in the workhouse for a good lesson, and 1 year probation. And son, you better keep your nose clean. Any more trouble, if you get so much of a traffic ticket, I'll ship you to St. Cloud for a year or two. The judge pounded his gravel. 30 days. A hard-boiled policeman took my arm and led me out of the side door. At the last second, I glanced back at my parents. They were sitting there like statues, staring at the floor.